Folks, I'm sorry for the little delay here in terms of the filming, but as of right now, I'm in the process of moving my room around, so it's not in the process of being in the spirit of how it used to be. But hopefully, within the next, like, say, episode or two, maybe by season 4. I don't know if I do have a season 4 yet. But as of right now, welcome back. This is episode 9, season 3. I know. I've done this so many times, I've lost count already. But joining me today is a theatrical actor, wrestler, named Hamlet Hurtssue, if you...
Hamlet Hurtssue.
Yes.
You pronounce the T too much in the hurt, then I hurt you, but it's if we can get the nice resounding Hurtssue, then we're set.
Hurtssue.
There you
go. Hurtssue.
Perfect.
I have a love and hate thing with Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare, but I also hate him because it's the way pronunciation is sometimes. But
sure.
But I know. So yeah, Hamlet. How did you become engrossed in the performing arts?
So when I was a teenager in high school, I was in a pre-college level acting program that was a pre-college conservatory program. And in those 4 years, I spent a lot of time studying Shakespeare, studying different forms of theater. And by the time I got to college, I got into the Purchase Theater Conservatory of Arts. And they had a new program that was being developed, which involved all aspects of theater within the conservatory. And I could do acting, directing, writing. And it was in my time at Purchase that my imagination really developed, and the skills and knowledge that I had attained within my pre-college conservatory program and at Purchase kind of all came to fruition by my junior year. And in my sophomore year of college, I worked with Lenora Champagne, who is a professor at NYU. She's one of the founding members of solo performance in New York City. And I studied under her for a little while. And within her class, her solo class, I came up with this idea, which was essentially my story in terms of my love for wrestling, my love for storytelling, and my love for Shakespeare. And within this kind of 15-minute segment that I did at the end of her class, she was so enthralled by my story and the things that I wanted to accomplish and pursue that she immediately was on my side in terms of, look, I think this is something you need to develop. I know that by the end of your time here, you're going to have to develop a thesis and pitch an idea to do for your degree. And I think this is something that you might want to look into pursuing. So it was at that time in my sophomore year that I really started diving into myself and kind of taking everything that I've learned and became up to that point. And I formed this story called The Renaissance of Wrestling, Renaissance of the Ring, which is my story, which is basically the story of a performer that has a love for wrestling and a love for Shakespeare and finds himself in this limbo land of he can become the character and the dream of everything he wants to accomplish within wrestling, but at the same time with the stereotypes and the opinions that society in itself today has of wrestling. Where do I, as a character, as a person, as a performer, fit in? And Renaissance of the Ring was this solo story that I told as my thesis to the school. And when I was finished, the board of study that was not necessarily super supportive of the idea. I wanted to take a wrestling ring and put it into one of their theaters. And I wanted to basically have... I can
imagine how well that went. I need a wrestling ring for my production. Yeah. Wrestling ring, okay.
Yeah. And again, this is Purchase. This is one of the most recognized theater art schools in New York, in the country. And here's a board of study with, like I said, Lenora Champagne, Gary Waller, Shakespearean scholar who was a professor at Oxford and the former president of the school, David Bassick, former head of the Theater Arts Conservatory. These were all people that were very concerned about the projects and things that were going to be coming out of this class, because when I first got to Purchase, this degree that I was pursuing was a new degree within the conservatory. So the first class that was coming out with a degree, they were very concerned about, we want to make sure that everybody's putting out legit work that could develop into something. So when I pitched my idea, the board was very kind of on the fence about it, but the school itself, the community, was incredibly supportive. And without the support of the community and a few of the members of the board, like Lenora and Gary and David, that really believed in me and what I was doing, I would have necessarily not been approved, because there was only a handful of theaters, only a handful of slots available, and the performance slots were obviously very treasured, because not everyone can have access to doing all these things. But the community was incredibly supportive. I had a lot of people backing me, and fortunately enough, I was granted permission to take control of the space, get a ring in there, and do my thing. So now, up until this point, I have my pre-college conservatory education, I have my education at Purchase, and I am very grounded in myself as a performer and the stories I want to tell. But the one thing that I hadn't done up to that point is train as a wrestler.
Yeah.
So within my junior year of college, once I knew that this was the direction that I really wanted to take, I started with Johnny Rods at the World of Unpredictable Wrestling, and being a Hall of Fame wrestler who wrestled with Hulk Hogan and the $1 Million Man, and just you name Andre the Giant, I can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
He was one of the mainstays of the Worldwide Wrestling Federation back in the day, before it became the WWF, before it became the WWE and what it is today. So to be able to have the respect and the not permission, but the guidance of this man as I was going from my junior year into my senior year, trying to really own my skills as a physical wrestler and understand how I'm going to take all of these elements and include them in my story at Purchase and kind of tell everything I wanted to tell. Yeah. And within that first year of training, I really started understanding what it is that I bring to the table and the things that make me unique as a wrestler, as a performer. And once I had finished my degree and I did Renaissance of the Ring at Purchase, the turnaround of the board of study was just beyond inspirational. I had, like I said, a handful of people in my corner, but the full board had to come to a preview performance that I did before it was open for my 4-day run at the school. And it was the board of study with a handful of people that were allowed to come in. And I remember at the end of the performance, I was standing outside the ring drenched in sweat from everything I had just done. And the board formed like a half circle around me. And they're all looking at each other saying, does anybody have any notes or any comments or concerns about moving forward? And they were all just like looking at each other, jaws dropped, and they left the theater hugging me individually, drenched in my sweat. And that was such a win, because it was such a struggle to be able to be understood as the performer, as the wrestler, and to have my dreams and my goals understood by them, and then to have them sit in the space and see everything just from point A to point B, and have them leave understanding and appreciating and indulging me to take this forward. That was the nail on the coffin for me, that like the last few years that I've been here, that I've been developing this idea and kind of finding who I am as a performer, this is the end all be all of now I know where I am and where I want to be. And that was the point where the theater background combined with the wrestling. And once I graduated, it was my goal to really take Renaissance of the Ring as its own piece and find a way to bring it back that would have a grand reception and support. But obviously, as I'm sure you're aware and a lot of performers are aware, it's very hard to find spaces that are suitable for what you want to do, especially if you want to put a wrestling ring in a theater in New York. I mean, that's just like astronomical in terms of dreams and goals.
I mean, so, you could find a theater of your choice and see if the theater is large enough to actually put a wrestling ring in it and actually
Mhm.
try and do, one-man show inside that, space. But when you're also trying to, because where it boils down to is one, location; two, if that location fits the space; three, finding a wrestling ring that actually fits that location, because you could do it in a black box, and a black box could be,
Black box would be ideal in my opinion.
yeah, it could be ideal, but at the same time, the black box should, be legitimately be not as high as you could be, because a wrestling ring is a pretty big.
Sure. Yeah. No, the raise is significant. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you have to find at least, that's why it's always like location always matters, and then find the location, and then find that location, price always matters too, and then you have to configure a fact of getting a wrestling ring that is perfect for the location, but also perfect for the budget you usually do, because
Absolutely.
we see with Purchase. I've seen a theater at Purchase because one of my friends, Stephen, he actually graduated from Purchase he graduated from Purchase with a lightning design, like he was a lightning design major there. So
yeah, their lighting program is phenomenal.
yeah, and I've seen the stage at Purchase, and it's like, it's very great. It's like very spacious and gracious. I'm just like, okay, it's like you could probably fit whatever on there, and you would still have enough room to have like another cell on there just to be on the safe side.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I've seen the clip. Well, I don't think it's a clip, but I think it's a music video of the Renaissance of the Ring on YouTube, and it looks phenomenal because
Appreciate that.
you do your, like, it starts off with you in the ring as sort of like the Hamlet character, and then as the music video goes by, you just switches into you appear as Stone Cold, and I'm just like, it's like I turn my head for a second. I'm like, is this a match now? It's like, is he fighting someone dressed as Stone Cold? And then I realized, oh wait, that is him. And I'm like, and you do the whole beer thing too, is like, and I'm like, okay, this is inventive, and I kind of wish I could actually see that whole video, because I've seen solo work before, because my college at Brooklyn College has an excellent solo performance work done by my comedy professor, one of my favorite professors there, Manuel Sirens, and he's able to do so much to do with people's solo work, because I would see things that would go on like maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but with you said, oh, it's a 15-minute thing, and solo work, especially if you're doing a one-man show, that's literally like, people have done one-man shows like John Leguizamo, stuff like him. He's done like an hour and a half, close to 2 hours of just solo performance.
Well, the show in itself was about an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh wow!
Yeah, the video clip. To be honest, it would have gone longer, but that was my deadline. So the week of the show, I turned in my script, and they were like, in theory, this is going to run longer. This is going to run about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And it was only really the finish, because at the end, so being that it was a solo performance, again, in general, it's entirely me the entire time. But within the story, I had wrote 3 characters that sit ringside along with the audience that sometimes get involved in a way that their presence affects what's happening, but it's still me. And then by the end of the performance, one of the characters that's present actually gets involved, and he is a part of the wrestling match with me. And the way I viewed it at the time is, while he's a specific character, I'm in theory wrestling myself, because the whole story is me struggling with the idea of having my dreams and the goals and things I want to pursue, but also the fear of not being understood in this world, not being accepted as a legitimate part of this world. And that internal conflict comes out as a physical story between me and the guy I was working with. And, it was an incredible time. And like you were saying before, it's doable to find the right space and the right place and the right time. But being that Renaissance of the Ring is essentially just me and a handful of people, like, to find the investments and the production that would
Yeah.
really have everything come to fruition the way it was is very difficult. In some cases, when you have a large crew or a real team that's really there with you, everyone's working towards the same goal, and that community support is a little bit more incentivizing in terms of making sure you're getting where you need to go. The fact that Renaissance of the Ring was just me and a handful of people that I wrote into it. So by the time I graduated and I had this support from the board of study and the community saying, hey, look, you got to get this out there. By the time I left, it was really just me, myself, and I, like knocking on doors, being like, hey, look, how do I find a way to make this work? And it was in the pursuit of that I realized, between the response that I would get from people who came to the show who don't have any association with wrestling and don't necessarily like Shakespeare. I had people coming up to me from all backgrounds and all walks of life in the first couple of days after I had finished, as everyone was leaving the school, finding me in the lunch area or wherever, just saying, oh my God, Hamlet, I came to your show and I'm not even a part of theater, but just the fact that your story resonated with me so much, the insecurity and the fear I have about the things I want to pursue leaving school, I know I have to do it now, just because there was something in that moment that you connected with me. And that was more than I could have asked for. I mean, like, having the board turn around and respect wrestling and respect what I wanted to do, that was a win enough to say, look, this is where I want to go. But the fact that there were some community of the students coming up to me at random points throughout the last couple of days saying, look, this resonated with me so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was, how do I get to the next level and make the return of Renaissance of the Ring what I believe it could be? And then it became, I need to take myself as the character, as the performer, as the wrestler, and go out and have people see me in this world and understand what I do in this world. And through that attraction and that attention and that connection that I make with them, bring them back down the road to the rebirth of Renaissance of the Ring. And that's when, in that last 6 months to a year that I finished school, I just was all out. Look, this is what I want to do. This is the world I want to live in. And I was dedicated, and I haven't turned back since. And the last 5 years have just been me doing everything I can to make Hamlet as legitimate and accepted as a wrestler and performer as I can. And it's been a wild ride up to this point, and I wouldn't change it. So that's kind of how the theater molded into the wrestling. And then as far as a character within Renaissance of the Ring, I was always Hamlet. Hamlet was me, but in terms of names and monikers and things like that, there was always an evolution. Like when I started training, Johnny Rods gave me a name that I used while I was working. And while that name wasn't Hamlet, it was me. And you get to a certain place where you want to be able to have whatever position or story you're being put into work. And you find a way to make the things you bring to the table work with whatever is being thrown at you. So there was a lot of time before Hamlet really became Hamlet Hurtssue, the Renaissance of wrestling, where I had to evolutionize myself as the performer and fully become this living, breathing character that is my bipolar other self. And it really is something that the more I've wrestled and the more I've worked, I've realized it's really something that's out of body. It's so me that when I go through the curtain and the bell rings, it literally is another form of me that comes to life. And please. I'm not talking a lot.
No, it's okay. I like it when my guests talk more than I do, but it's like what you're just saying. It's like the moment you get on stage, i.e. the wrestling ring, it's just like there's this different vibe that's coming from you. And then the moment you're off stage, you just like, you could just feel like, oh, wow, that was like, it's like, as an actor, I can't explain it because you have to be on stage. But when you're on stage, it's like there's all these different things just firing off at the same time. And then when you walk off stage, you're just like, Just give me a couple of seconds before I go back on stage, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's because as an actor, you need to feed off of the audience. And when the
Absolutely.
audience, and when the audience loves you, they love you. When they laugh at you, they laugh at you. But when you're just, doing your thing and they're just silently watching you, you don't know if they're like liking you or not. So it's like, it's very like that. But
Absolutely.
as a wrestler, you have to feed off of the crowd because as a babyface, you have to win the match if you're the babyface. But if you're the heel, you're literally just sucking in all the heat and all the animosity that your crowd is just giving to you. You could be the biggest asshole in the ring, and they're like, "Boo!" They tossing shit, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
When Hulk Hogan turned heel in, what was it, 96, 97? When he
Yeah.
became Hollywood Hogan, that's a famous heel term because, it's Hulk Hogan. You don't expect Hulk Hogan, the biggest babyface in the whole world, to just do up and just say, oh, I'm dark side, brother, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And just form the NWO, that sort of thing. So when you have, but that does actually lead into another question I want to bring to you.
Sure.
How much of theater, especially going into like promo time, because I imagine promo time is like almost like a solo performance of sorts. You have a mic. You may have someone staying beside you, feeding you line, well, not lines, but like feeding you like what to say next.
There's a story that needs to be told, and we're figuring out how that's
where to go next. In terms of how theater, because we're both kind of agreeing that theater and wrestling have a very interesting background because they're very interconnected, like how theater and how theater and music are interconnected. There are different aspects of theater that are very interconnected to other aspects of entertainment. But because I feel like theater and wrestling, they're almost similar because, like in theater, wrestlers, well, technically they're playing in quotation marks.
Thank you for the quotation marks.
Yeah, playing. But wrestlers do wrestle. They are performers, and they are like actors and all that stuff. They are performers as well, and they're risking their body and limits in the ring, especially if it's like they just happen to just do a 12-hour drive to the next show, and they're like,
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. I feel like I'm mixing my point, but in terms of theater and wrestling, how much of the theater world actually engrosses wrestling? Because I know when you do a promo, it is almost like doing a solo performance.
So I love that question, and it also helps me tie into some of the things I want to talk about. So the fact that theater and wrestling have a lot of lines that are blurred. When I finished school and I really found myself on this path that I've been taking the last few years, the more I've been in it, the more I've realized that I feel so much more comfortable in this world as opposed to just the theater world, as much as I love theater. And it goes really with this. In theater, there's stage combat, and there are all these things that help create the illusion of this moment in time and space is really happening. And it's only until the suspension of disbelief is broken that you're involved and you're with it and you're emotionally connected. When it comes to wrestling, there are a handful of moments that are given to you because at the end of the day, we have a story to tell. So whether it's a promo that you're doing and you have to have certain circumstances and elements within that promo that heighten the drama and the excitement for what's about to happen, those things are a combination of you as the performer improvise and find yourself in a way that expresses the heightened excitement of this story. And then there's the match itself, where there's a handful of moments that perhaps the promoter's like, hey, look, this guy does this move. I want you to work something out so this move happens. And then we have something going on 3 months from now, and this guy's got to go over for setting that up for 3 months. So I want the match to have this type of finish, so it builds to this thing that we want to do in 3 months. Like, those things are very theatrical because at the end of the day, those are dictated by the story that we're coming to tell. But the thing that I love that has kind of made me feel so comfortable and so grounded within wrestling as a wrestler is the fact that my entire life I've trained my body to be physical within a performance. And it's really in the ring that my love for Shakespeare and performing is legitimized in an entirely new way. Because we live in a world today that's very different from the 80s and the 90s where wrestlers had a very specific look and a very specific way of doing their thing. Today, it's a different world, and that's not to say that one thing is better than the other, but there's a lot of different things that are happening within wrestling. So the one thing that I've found a lot of joy in is when I come and I do my thing, when I step through the curtain, there's always this kind of connected, lighthearted laugh as, oh my God, I understand what's happening right now, and I love this and appreciate this. And then that transfers to, oh my God, this guy is doing something that's physically intense, and I don't know how to feel right now. Like, that has been such a driving factor to me because it takes my love for wrestling and Shakespeare and makes people look at them in an entirely different way. And it's all associated with what I'm bringing to the table. So to answer the question in terms of what theater and wrestling is connected, there are moments where you're coming in to do the job, and within the promo, you have to get certain things explicitly conveyed to the audience so they know what to expect in a sense of the heightened and the drama. And the ending of the match is specific in terms of what it needs to build to and lead towards in the coming months of what you're developing. But everything outside of that is really the wrestlers coming together and saying, look, you do this and I do this. And how are we going to physically tell the best story that takes the promo that we did and the finish of what this guy wants and make it everything it could possibly be. And within that, that's when the physicality happens and those moments where you as the audience member, there is no breaking the suspension of disbelief, because if you see a 250-pound man that's doing Shakespeare throw somebody outside the ring and say, I'm the best thing you've ever seen, you're like, oh my God, where am I ever going to see anything like this? And B, how does this giant Shakespearean man come to being to have me appreciate these things and whatever? So I have found myself more comfortable as a wrestler because all of my education and experiences that have made me the performer I am have elevated me in a way that I'm very comfortable in this world in terms of what I bring to the table and the spontaneity and improvisation that I do in the moment that makes people that much more excited. And it's those elements that I feel lack in theater because it's so specific and so set. Obviously, when you get to the theater, when you get to the show happening, the show takes a life of itself. So while the director is in the back and saying, look, I want X, Y, and Z to happen, you do the rehearsal, you do the process, and then that happens. By the time the show happens, it takes a life of its own, and that's when things change along the way. But it doesn't necessarily stray too far from what was set. And in wrestling, it could always change. It could always be different. It could always be exciting. And that's what I love about it.
In a way, acting and wrestling, you have to be very adaptable to the situation because, like you just said before, you could do a rehearsal and then you could do all that stuff. And then by the time you do performance, we have everything for separate performance. And then during the performance, when the actors might actually stray off to the mark that they were originally, they're supposed to go stage left, but they go stage right. And then you have to figure out, okay, we'll just roll off stage right with them. And then, with wrestling, it's like the same thing because the idea is to actually give you a exciting match, i.e. sell the match to a great extent. And then because I've seen your work with, I've seen your work on YouTube and stuff like that. And here you are, you'd be doing like an arm bar or something like that. And then you'd be looking at the crowd and then you'd be like, you would just go into a soliloquy like that as you just like arm wrenching the guy, and I'm just like, wait a minute, here's this big guy doing like a standing arm wrench, and then you're just turning to the ground, and then a second later you're turning to the crowd and just starting to do a soliloquy just like off the top of your head, and I'm just like, that is inventive because, you know, as an actor, like I said before, as an actor, you have to be adaptable to the situation because things always change, and especially in wrestling, things change like on an instant. Something that you probably had already worked up with something you probably worked up over the day might change just before the match, saying, "Hey, I know the fans was going to be you doing a moonsault, but we have to change it because, you know, your opponent is not feeling well. So if you go off the top of the rope and do a moonsault, we fear he might, you know, puke or something like that.
Sure.
So we got to do something more safer to do all that. So, you know, so in adaptability, it's always a good thing, especially as an actor, because even if someone forgets their line, you could always feed them a line by just recurring another line in the process. So it's like it's because especially since, you know, it's not because, you know, I feel like I'm stuttering here, so I'm sorry, folks.
No, you're fine.
If someone forgets that line, you could always say the line repeatedly, not like repeatedly, you know, like do like that. You could always give the person next to you or something like that a little hint of what the next line is, and then it's like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, if the line was like, oh, I got to go to the store, and they don't say I'm not going to go to the store, it's like they had that line. It's like, so I'm hungry, so, and you know why I'm hungry? Because I haven't eaten all day. And you just, as an actor, you just get like what you just said before with improv. It's like, you know, a little improv does actually come to it, and then the actor, of course, oh, I'm sorry, babe. You know, I got to go to the store. So, and then heads off stage. As a wrestler, it's also the same thing where it's like you have to work with improvisation, because improvisation is very key into working in a match and also saving a match, depending on how bad the match is going. Because, you know, it could be a good match, but also could be a bad match depending on who you're facing.
Absolutely.
or a bad match in terms of not because of pacing, because it might be because we got 3 minutes, but the stuff that we have doesn't fit the 3 minutes that we, you know, like the time. You know what I mean?
A big thing that comes down to it, I feel that I see on a lot of different shows and in matches is, and it's the same thing in acting in that sense, is there's an objective, right? There's a major goal that needs to be accomplished, right? And within that major goal, there are all these sub goals, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of time, whether it's conditioning, you know, because again, wrestlers are some of the best athletes in the world at what they do. And I think a lot of people get confused in terms of some wrestlers want to look a certain way, so they train a certain way. It really isn't about that. People don't understand the mind that you have to have in the ring with what's going on. And when your heart rate is up 75, 80% maximum heart rate, and your brain is still in the moment of knowing how you need to tell the story, beyond things going awry and needing to improvise, you know, to have everything go perfectly and still have the conditioning and the ability to keep your mind where it needs to be, is something that is incredibly taxing and incredibly misunderstood. But a perfect example of that is I just had a show this past weekend at Test of Strength, and it was my big return, my in-ring debut at Fight for Your Dreams. It's their WrestleMania show. It's their big show of the year. And not to go into too much detail, but there was something that was expressed that needed to happen, and that thing didn't happen. And it was up to me to have to bring us back to a place where things could kind of fix themselves. And you know, things happened, and this is the world where the excitement and the drama and the unpredictability of what's going to happen is really based in people being able to work on the fly. So
things go off rails so much, especially in theater.
But especially in wrestling, like, you know, in theater, there's a very set understanding of this is the world we're in, and this is what happens when you're working in wrestling, and your work is based off of the excitement of everyone around you investing in what's happening. The second something goes awry or there's a moment of lackluster in a build, especially towards something that is supposed to be the climax of the story you're telling, there's a very different understanding in our world where the intensity has to be raised, you know? And if something is happening that's taking us off kilter in terms of where we need to be, someone needs to take charge in raising the intensity. And a lot of times, things aren't always agreed upon. You know, it's like, you know, you get to the back and somebody might be a little, you know, not too happy about the way things happen. But at the end of the day, we have a job and a story to tell. And our job is to make sure people go home excited and happy with what they saw and ready to come back to the next show. And at the end of the day, I know this is how I feel, and my peers feel the same way. I would much rather have the intensity and the excitement there and not physically feel my best after the match than have somebody come out and not have the intensity where it needs to be, and we go to the back and then everyone goes home like, yeah, you know, that was okay, you know? And that's the difference between theater and wrestling is we as wrestlers know this isn't ballet. You know, this isn't boxing, this isn't MMA, but it's not 100% theater. So there's this level of, we give our bodies to each other in a sense that is, we're trusting each other, but at the end of the day, we're doing it to give the person that came to the show their money's worth. So we are putting our bodies in line every time we come in the ring. And more times than not, things happen that, you know, really blur the lines between reality and theater. And I'm not going to lie, that's another reason that I love it so much, because I wouldn't do something to someone that I wouldn't expect them to do back to me. And, you know, it's a world that is very misunderstood and very shaky in terms of what is theater and what is wrestling. But like I said, that's one of the major reasons that I'm in it. So.
It actually does bring me to another point with theater and wrestling, is that sometimes, like in theater, there are a character like such as you, Hamilton. It's the same.
No, I get that. I get that a lot too. You'd be surprised.
Hamlet Hurtssue. A character like you, or it's just a person like yourself. When you come out to the ring and you have a skull, you know, you're carrying a skull, old Paul York. Or is it York or York?
York.
York. Okay, because I'm always making. I'm partly dyslexic. And you're coming to the ring. You're talking to the skull, and then it's very almost comedical sometimes. It's like
absolutely,
yeah, and like you have this comedical aspect in your thing where it's like, oh, you have the skull, and it's like, oh, like this character's like Shakespeare, and it's like. You do a little soliloquy sometimes in the middle of the ring or something like that. And then you do your wrestling stuff and like, oh, wow, this guy isn't playing around. And then, you know, I forgot what I was watching, but I was watching a match where it might have been a highlight reel, but I was watching a match where you were using you literally had a skull, you're talking to the skull, and then 5 seconds, like a quick moment later, you literally just smash the skull against someone's head. It goes, York, why? So, in terms of what, and okay, this might be a little like a hot topic in terms of wrestling now, because wrestling now, it's odd because comedy and wrestling seem to be a little hand in hand also. It's like there are comedy, I won't say like comedy acts, but there are, I don't want to say like wrestlers, but people who are inspired by wrestling who try and do like the comedy stuff within wrestling. So they may not be wrestlers, but they also may be wrestlers.
Sure.
You see like the comedy aspect in wrestling working for the past, because I know for the past couple of years it has been workable, but now I feel like the comedy and wrestling thing has sort of come like almost like it's still there, but it's not like there anymore. It's sort of like that, like in theater, there are people who do comedy, but it's like the comedy plays, especially the comedy plays, they still do well. It's just that people love more dramatic work and stuff like that. But yeah, in your expertise, or at least in your yeah, in your point of view or expertise, have you seen like the comedy style wrestling going away, or is it still like there?
It's a great question. So
That's
I,
a
I
that's a long-winded question just to say, hey, is comedy wrestling still a thing?
no, it's all good. So I feel like there's always going to be niche needs, right? There's always going to be an audience that wants a certain story and comes for that story. And I feel like within a wrestling show, there are opportunities for different styles. Like one match could be a strong style hitting match, another style could be a comedy match. You know, another match is designed to get one person over the other. There's all different forms. I feel like every match has its own place on the card, right?
Yeah,
So within that card, I feel like there is room for comedy, but the problem is that um, above the comedy needs to be legitimacy.
yeah,
So um, a lot of comedy gimmicks, I feel, lose the legitimacy because they push the comedy too much. And
yeah,
in that sense, your suspension of disbelief is gone from the minute, because if I can't invest and believe in you and what you're doing, then why am I here? I came to have my suspension of disbelief put, you know, in a place where I can enjoy and believe in what you're doing. So with that said, I feel like there is a need for, not a need, there is a place for comedy wrestling.
yeah,
And as I really first started developing Hamlet within my I want to say 2017, 2018, I pushed the comedy a lot because
yeah,
I wanted to push what everyone around me was saying worked best, right? So
yeah,
in a world where absolutely no one knows you, like what's going to be the thing that remembers you? And on wrestling shows all the time, you see moves done, you know, 10, 12 people do the same move, you know, because
yeah,
it happens. So, you know, and especially if the person in that match that does that move is building it as a big move, unless it's something that's specific to your character and your, you know, gimmick, it's going to be forgotten. And it's going to be the one person that has a strong character or works that move into their character that is remembered. And then no matter how many times they see the move, they're going to remember that guy because that guy made it work for his gimmick.
yeah,
So when I first started really pushing Hamlet, I really did push a lot of the comedy because I wanted to exemplify the things that I felt were working for my character. But the more that I played with comedy, the more I realized that there are certain things that I bring to the table that a lot of comedy wrestlers don't have. And
yeah,
that's just, you know, it's not a fault on anyone. It's just, you know, some people have some things and some people don't. So I had this development and evolution of a comedy style character that really was a more amped up version of me and the intensity that I want to bring.
yeah,
And that's when I started to find the balance between comedy working and tragedy. And I think the best stories have elements of both, right?
yeah,
Because you can't have too much drama without a little bit of lightheartedness, and you
yeah.
can't have too much lightheartedness without a little bit of seriousness, you know?
That,
So,
that's why your namesake is so great. Of it's like I had to do a Hamlet. Like I don't say like paper. Well, not like a thesis paper. I think it was a thesis paper, but it was like a research paper, and I had to research Hamlet and all that stuff. And there's so much like tragedy in that play, and then there's like moments of levity where it's like, oh, he meets the the grave diggers, and then he meets Rosen. It's like there's Rosengild and
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Yeah, you
yeah,
got it.
Guildenstern.
Yeah, you got
And then there's like these, and then they have moments like, oh, Ophena's there's like suicide. I'm like, holy, yeah, and, Hamlet talking to his father who was dead.
it. Polonius's random speech of just saying all these things. Like, there's
Yeah.
certain things that you're just kind of like, okay.
And it's like what you just said before. You have to. Shakespeare has like a great sense of blending both tragedy and comedy at the same time, and his, I forgot the name of the term, but it's like those the comedy tragedy stories he does uh, are very well. Oh wait, they might be a separate thing. I'm sorry, folks. I haven't done Shakespeare in a while, so I've forgotten a lot of this stuff. But forgive me, Will. I don't want the ghost of William Shakespeare. You're just like,
Sorry, I'll tell York to put in a good word for you, so the ghost of
thank
Shakespeare
you,
doesn't haunt your dreams.
thank you. But yeah, and it's the same thing when we talk about with that interconnectability is that wrestling does have those moments of levity where it's just like hilarious to watch, and then you have these moments of tragedy where it's like the people that you want to win, they don't win, and they have to go. And it's like John Cena, he has lost a couple of times in my. He may have lost a couple of times. Yeah, he has lost.
Everyone wins and loses.
Yeah,
they
and
have to, yeah.
when you have someone who wins and it's the person that you don't want to win, that builds that animosity back towards what we were just talking about before, especially with, character wise, especially as the bad guy. You want that animosity because because the crowd does not want you to win. And when you win, you're just like they hate you even more, but they still love you even more because you won the match, because they've seen you as okay, this guy is a credible worker. But at the same time, I have to hate him because, he
Yeah.
wasn't the person that I wanted to win. So yeah, there is, in wrestling, there is that, like the same thing on theater, there is that level of both where it's like the comedy does work, but you also have to interject it with the tragedy too, where it's like the hero does not win at the end of the day. It's like you can't ride off into the sunset when the sunset is just on the villain's shoulders now. It's not the hero.
Absolutely. And a little anecdote just to pick up off that, because I know you were mentioning that you appreciated and saw how I would, do my thing and then put somebody in a hold and then start going soliloquies, right? So to go off the element of having tragedy and comedy within the story, one thing that I've enjoyed is when I'm super in my groove and aware, and I know who I'm working with and the story we're telling. What I love to do is I like to take different monologues and different soliloquies from different plays and put them into the context of what's happening right now, and then completely change the way the words are being interpreted by the audience. So like on Sunday, I wrestled in Marble, New York, and I had one kid in a chokehold, and I started doing the Hamlet speech, oh, that this two solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. And anyone who knows the play knows that in that moment, Hamlet is talking about himself. He's wishing that he would die, he would just melt into the floor because he's so depressed and anxious about not knowing how his father died, his father's dead, whatever's happening. Within the moment of the wrestling, in this moment, I am using those words, that monologue, to talk about my opponent, and that this two solid flesh, this guy that's here, he is going to melt and thaw, and he is going to go into the canvas. And like little things like that completely change the way people understand Shakespeare, understand the context of what's being said, is also just another like lighthearted thing that I enjoy. Because in that moment, someone who has no idea about Hamlet or the play will understand the words in that context if they do hear them. And maybe that's enough to get them interested to kind of figure out what's really going on here. Maybe not with Shakespeare, but with me. And then the more they see me and understand that that's how I include my things into my work, they are more intrigued by the whole concept in general.
Have you had people like after a show come up to you who's like, hey, I hated you during the match, but I love that style of thing, and I think you got me into Shakespeare. Like, have you gotten people who was like, I haven't understood Shakespeare well, but now I kind of want to like get back into Shakespeare?
Absolutely. So I before the pandemic hit,
Which we'll talk about in a couple of moments. Now that you mentioned the pandemic, I was like, I haven't talked about the pandemic so much yet.
But yeah, I've definitely had people, and you'd be surprised. Like I have kids. I'll do shows and I'll be the bad guy. Like I'll play that part, right? And then I'll have kids come up to me after the show and like want to hug me, hold the oar.
Aww.
Yeah, it's so rewarding, and it's so kind of off because it's like the people that are old enough to kind of understand what's happening. They're very set in like you said, like I love you, but I hate you, And like kids that have no real understanding of Shakespeare in that context have kind of come up to me and have a whole new not appreciation, but just like a whole new curiosity about Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that I trained with a long time ago, this is like 3-4 years ago, his sister was like in the 3rd grade or something like that, and his family had come to one of the shows, and they had seen me in one of my matches, and he had told me later that his sister was in her class or something, and they had a pop quiz of some kind, and like they weren't supposed to know the answers to any of these questions. It was kind of like a joke quiz, but his sister answered one of the questions about Shakespeare, because the question was like, oh, who said this quote? And she was like, oh, that's Hamlet. And then the teacher was floored, because she said, how'd you know that? She's like, oh, I went to one of my brother's wrestling shows and I saw this guy Hamlet. And the teacher was like, what? So like little things like that are incredibly rewarding. And then I know you're going to ask about it, so I won't go into it right now.
Yeah.
But when I was in Canada as well, I got to give a whole new appreciation and look for it. That was honestly probably the most rewarding moments I've had in my career this far.
But yeah, I think that the last question I should ask is the pandemic. And since, back in March or so, when everything was still in the process of not really shutting down, but there was a fear of something is going on, but there isn't, like, no one is really taking initiative. And then once the pandemic hit and then everything was shut down, especially in lockdown, how was it, especially as a wrestler? Okay, in a easy way to say it, describe your pandemic experience as a wrestler, because I know as a wrestler, if you weren't a WWE, or if you weren't contracted to WWE or AEW and had stuff like that, where you could actually go down to Florida and actually wrestle them, or stuff like that, everybody else was pretty much like in limbo. There were shows that were gonna be on WrestleMania weekend, had to cancel because stuff shit happens like that. Oh, and also Impact too, because Impact. Yeah, Impact is also it's out because Impact is both an American wrestling company, but it's also based in Canada too. So they're both like kind of like the same thing. But yeah, it's odd because it's odd how sports really has gotten a better chance with the pandemic, because if you're an actor, you kind of really share a lot, because we don't have, unless you're working TV or working in film production, the theater has we're literally on like the last of our legs, and we have to wait until January, February for everything to go back open, because stuff that we had, it's like stuff that we were waiting to do are now being put off until 2021, because my job, it was to deliver tickets and all that stuff, and how can I do that when all the theaters in New York City were shut down, and there are shows that were people, just yesterday, Beetlejuice the musical had literally just shipped and loaded out everything so Hugh Jackman's music band could actually go into theater. And early this year, that was a big thing, because it's like, oh, how can Beetlejuice be literally be kicked out of the curb, all that stuff. And again, that was the same thing what we were talking about before with the theater space, is that we have to have theater space for rent, all that stuff. Yeah. But yeah, from a wrestling standpoint, or at least wrestling fan standpoint, the pandemic was like hard for wrestlers, because the people that you want, and WrestleMania weekend will be a great place to actually get people to see and all that stuff too, because you have all these places doing like a bunch of shows that weekend. Especially if it was in the city WrestleMania would be hosting, that sort of thing. But then when the pandemic happened, it's like all these places like literally closed down. Mexico closed down, Canada closed down, and I know you just mentioned that. So yeah, from a wrestling standpoint, how was working towards the pandemic, especially when COVID when the COVID crisis hit America to where you were, because I know you were, like you were just said before, you were in Canada right as the switch was about to go. Okay, no one could go into Canada, no one could go out of Canada. Same thing with America. It was like, oh, we're kind of like closed off essentially for now. So, as a wrestler, what was it like uh, trying to do a career literally during a pandemic?
So right before the pandemic, I went on my first tour of Canada. I was there for about 6.5 weeks, and I wrestled in Quebec, in Ontario, and Manitoba, um, and I was wrestling 2, 3 matches a night. We were traveling 20, 30, sometimes 40 hours on the road to the next show.
Yeah.
And it was probably some of the most taxing times of my career thus far. And uh, the other side of that was we were traveling these ice road communities that are closed off essentially from societal normal communities. Not normal, but like they're isolated communities. So essentially, to get to some of these communities, you have to cross over frozen lakes, and to cross over these frozen lakes, you have to wait until it's about -25, -30 minimum
Oh,
to be able to cross over the lake and get to some of these communities. So we were traveling in Canada, sometimes -30, -40, -45 degrees, unloading, ring trucks, getting everything set up in that time. So it was a very incredible time to be working. And at this time, obviously, we weren't necessarily aware of it, but COVID was spreading. It was
yeah,
happening at the time. And a couple of us got very, very sick on that tour. And to this day, we don't know if it was COVID. I mean, like I've gotten tested. My antibody test came back negative, so I don't think
yeah,
that I could have it. But again, the timeline on these things is a little skewed. You don't necessarily know.
yeah,
Like, so we did all get very sick, but to just slowly put in one point about Canada before I get to the pandemic, just you were saying in terms of giving Shakespeare to people, a new appreciation. Yeah. So these communities that we traveled to were native tribal communities that so they're very closed, and in some cases, some of these communities don't teach Shakespeare.
yeah,
And there were a few communities that we went that when I started doing my thing, like the eyes of the adults and the kids and everyone around me was like I had just given them I don't know, like I had just opened the door to a whole new thing, and to really know that I was giving Shakespeare to people that had no association with it, and then for them to buy my 8x10s and my merchandise to remember this moment and cherish it, that was incredibly rewarding to me. So I came out of some of the most intense weeks of my career, like I said, traveling all over Canada, wrestling in these ice road communities in -30, -40 degrees.
yeah.
And I came home just before the country was shut down. And I went from wrestling 2, 3 matches a night, being on the road 20, 30, 40 hours to literally nothing.
Nothing.
And, it's a mind game, because especially having weeks on end of little sleep, drives, and matches to go from that. When you're in the moment, you love what you're doing so much. But then it's like those moments when, you've wrestled 4 or 5 matches in the last 2 days and you've slept like, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours. And you're like, you know what? When I get home and I lay on that bed, oh, am I going to love it?
Yeah.
Like, but then you get home and you lay on the bed and it's like, oh my God, the country shut down. Like, what's going on? So those first couple of weeks in March, it was more like the disbelief, like, what, this will pass,
Yeah.
By the time we got to beginning of April, that's when things started really starting to sink in and be like, WrestleMania is
Canceled. Like it's
ending,
canceled, but it's still happening, but it's canceled. But it's like, yeah, especially, it's odd because I just, during March, I was still in school and I was graduating at the same time. So at the end of the semester, I was like, oh, graduated, it's like all that stuff. But I didn't have the thing where I was building up for the past couple of years where I could just go, walk down the aisle, with my cap and gown, get my diploma, shake the dean's hand, president's hand, go off stage, do like this, and then go back to my seat and then go home with my family. So when I got graduated, it was literally just me behind. It was just like Brian M. Davis. I'm like, it's like like they literally just showed my face and just like the first thing, just like so. But it was nice to get that gratitude. But
Of course.
it's odd because for the past several years, it's sort of like you in wrestling. For the past several years, I've been getting my education backwards. I had a long time not going to school and all that stuff. So for the past several years, I literally have been nothing doing but just school work related stuff. And then over the past year, I have a job now. It's like I started doing that stuff too. So it's like when March hit, especially as a student, and you're like stuck at home with your family, and you're doing stuff like this over Zoom, where it's like you're making sure your classes on time, that sort of thing. It's an odd sensation, but then it's like what you just said before. It's like I'm catching up on so much sleep, and my body's not tired all the time.
Yeah.
I've gained some weight again, that sort of thing. It's like, but then it's like by the time April was rolling around, it's like we knew something was really, really going on, and then by the time May was like rolling around, it was like maybe by May it'll probably be better. Is that no? And then by the summer, it's like we just started becoming a lot more better, somewhat around, especially in New York. And then but we all know it's like by the time fall rolls around, well, that second wave hit, and then was like as we're doing this, like I'm recording this on October the 1st. So if this has been me talking about a second wave and it has not happened, so knock on wood, but fingers crossed, especially. But yeah, especially as a wrestler, not as a wrestler, but for you as a wrestler, it had to be very, very taxing, especially since you're very used to essentially being on the road for hours on end, days on end, and then by the time you get home for a day or two, and then it's just like now you're just like, oh, I'm home now. It's like, well, I'm home indefinitely.
Yeah.
So it had, from a psychology standpoint, it had to be very weird because especially since it's weird to be at home all the time when you still could go out, all that stuff, but now it's like things are starting to open up again. There are wrestling events popping up again, even though it's now more limited capacity, that sort of thing. But compared to how it was earlier this year, did you see that like switch around where it's like, did you actually see everything becoming sort of back to normal-ish, on the way becoming normal around this time? Or were you thinking, okay, maybe by January everything will be back to normal?
I mean, from my standpoint, like when I got back, like I live by myself, so I'm very close to my family. Like my family's in the neighborhood, but like I live by myself. So to be pretty much in a place where I have no alone time for like 6-7 weeks, and then I come back and I'm just like by myself. And of course you're concerned, you're worried about going to see loved ones and everything else because you don't know, you could be asymptomatic, whatever. So in general, that time was just very disconcerting and nerve-wracking. But to go hand in hand with that, the world doesn't stop, and the fact that you could turn on your TV and see what's happening with WrestleMania, what's happening with Impact, those things are reassuring. And WrestleMania in itself this year, personally, I was a fan of it. I know a lot of people had mixed feelings about it, but I thought it gave us a new experience that we wouldn't have had without the pandemic. And if we're following some of those stories going into WrestleMania, one of the things I enjoyed the most was a lot of the shit talking. A lot of times in wrestling, especially on TV, you can't hear what these guys are saying to each other. And, to be in a position where you're watching WrestleMania, which is the biggest show, the biggest buildup of everything that's happened this whole year, and now you're seeing these guys' conflicts and rivalries come to fruition in a new way where in the moment they're really jaw-jacking each other and things are building. It was a new experience. So between those style matches happening and then obviously the Undertaker AJ Styles new cinematic way of working, that was a whole new introduction. And a lot of promotions have now adapted that style
Yeah.
because obviously within the pandemic, it's very hard to do these shows. But you know, that was very hopeful to see things like that and say, you know what, as screwed up as the world is right now, there are lights at the end of these tunnels, you know.
Yeah.
And by the time we got to the middle of summer, you know, when you're watching AEW and like Dark, and you see a lot of guys get opportunities on there.
Yeah.
It's very hopeful to know that if you're in a place where you wake up every day and you know what, maybe I can't do this, maybe I can't do that, but I can get up, I can make sure I'm feeling good, I can make sure I'm ready, I can make sure I'm staying ready, and I'm ready to go if I get that phone call. You know, like that's the mentality that I've kept. So, and technically I am still the inaugural heavyweight champion of New Evolution Wrestling, which is an upcoming promotion. So knowing that like I am, you know, actively working, I'm still representing a company. I just came back from Canada. You know, I wrestled in Puerto Rico last year. I won a title down there. I have a lot of things that are keeping me focused in saying, you know what, as screwed up as things are right now, like I'm focused and I know what I want to accomplish. So, you know, and especially not having gyms or anything like that, it humbles you a lot because you have to work with the circumstances you're given. And it's like anything else in life. Something happens to you, it'll either crush you, define you, or you'll overcome it, right? So the pandemic happened to everyone, and everyone's been hit by it in different ways. And, you know, this fall, and especially the winter going into next year, it's going to be very telling, and it's going to overcome some people, define some people, and some people are going to, you know, are going to come out of it stronger. And I've been focused on making sure that I come out of this as strong as possible. And as long as I keep my goals in line and I keep myself focused, I'm confident that I'm going to get where I need to get to by the end of this year. So as hard as it's been to stay focused and hungry within the pandemic, you have to find the things that keep you inspired. So, you know, I keep my eyes on all the different products of wrestling. I make sure that, you know, I'm ready and I'm accessible for the safe opportunities that have come my way thus far. And, you know, fingers crossed that we can all come out of this stronger, and wrestling, theater, the arts, whatever, like everything kind of comes and doesn't necessarily become what it was, but becomes an evolutionized version of what it can be now, you know? Because I think that even after, you know, things start getting better, there's going to be a lot of fear. You know, people are not going to be as comfortable going to live events as they were, you know, even though, you know, you have things like gyms opening and shows happening at small capacity, you can see that there is still a lot of fear about what's going to happen. And this, especially since we're entering the fall, we don't know what is going to be with the second wave. But you know, as long as we can all take the standpoint of keeping ourselves safe and keeping focused on whatever our goals are, you know, I think that as individuals, as a country, we'll all come out of it stronger. So.
Yeah. And it's like what you just said before, there is a light and then at the end of the tunnel where it's like you have these companies like the WWE doing more cinematic matches where it's like, you know, AJ versus Undertaker, and then they recently, you know, Bray Wyatt versus John Cena, Braun again versus Bray Wyatt in a Swamp Yard match. I think that was, And then you have Impact doing the same thing almost, where it's like they're doing like a very lucha underground style. Yeah, where they're emulating that style, and then they have this whole subplot during the summer called Wrestle House, where it's like a bunch of their wrestlers were just stuck in their house, almost like in a very reality-based thing. And with AEW, they have, you know, Being the Elite, and you know, it's like even though there isn't much to do with theater or movies for that effect, you know, video games, that's a different story. But, yeah, video games, you know, I'm still catching up on my video games too. But as someone who is an actor, it's just very inspiring to see wrestling to put out not only weekly shows, especially on TV. You know, WWE, they put out like 4 or 5 shows a week, and that's depending on which show you watch. A&E is doing AEW is doing 2 shows a week. You know, they film probably, and they said they filmed Dark like after after the like Dynamite is filmed too, so
Yeah.
or maybe even before Dynamite. And then you have Impact too, who is filming like a month worthy of shows within a week, so people don't have to do
Come
this
back and forth.
like
Yeah.
come back and forth, especially if they're coming from Canada too, which is
Yeah.
another. I could. There was another question I wanted to ask you, but it's like another probably question you could probably go into another thing, which is basically, the other question I was going to ask you before that was like, especially working in both Canada and Puerto Rico, is like, how would those two styles differ, especially since, Puerto Rican wrestling is very vastly different than to how Canada is in terms of their wrestling,
Yeah.
especially in terms of American. But that's like, again, that's like a whole conversation for another day, especially. But yeah.
I can give you a super quick 3-sentence answer to that.
Oh, okay.
Like, Puerto Rico is like notorious for being like one of the most hardcore territories in the world. So the audience there has a very specific desire in terms of what they want to see.
They want to see blood and guts.
Yeah, but again, I'm not really a blood and guts guy. I am a performance artist. I am the renaissance of wrestling, and I am better than the blood and guts in terms of what that is. So over there, it's for what I bring to the table. It's more comedy that pushes the line of really wanting to hate you. Not necessarily, you know what I mean? In Canada, it was getting that response of having people that don't necessarily know Shakespeare and working that in a way that gets them to hate me, but also gets them to have an appreciation for it. So the styles are different in terms of what I'm giving, but at the end of the day, they're all stemming from the same thing. It's just a matter of knowing your audience and knowing what buttons you have to push here as opposed to there to get the reaction you want.
And I think with that notion, especially with I think with that notion, I can just wrap up today's episode. It's got to be a very long episode. So
I'm sorry about that. I talk a lot.
Oh no, I love it when my guests and I talk for like hours on end. But also, like I said before, theater and wrestling go hand in hand, especially in terms of where it's almost like the bastard stepchild of the theater, where it's
Absolutely.
like
I couldn't say it better myself. Absolutely, 100%.
It's like you have your wrestling and then you have your theater, and it's almost like the same thing. Where it's like but in wrestling, there's a lot. It's like there's a lot more leeway than in theater. At least in theater, it is a set ground rules. Like everything is more set, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
In wrestling, things can go off the rail as soon as the match can start. So, but you have a great amount of knowledge, especially in terms of both Shakespeare and also theater. And I love the fact that you're doing a lot of Shakespearean style of, I won't say like Machiavellian, but it's like close to like that in terms of your character. And, I do have 3 other questions that are left. I think you've already answered advice. Like you kind of like answered the advice question like before, especially when you were talking. But can we expect anything from you in the next coming months, especially going forward into 2021?
Absolutely. So I'm returning to Test of Strength in Connecticut on October 24th, and I'm wrestling in a tag match with Ty Shine against Anthony Michaels and a mystery opponent. And we got some rivalry there because, like I said, I made my in-ring return to Test of Strength this past weekend, and things didn't necessarily go according to plan. So I know that the audience definitely got their money's worth in terms of the intensity that we brought. And I know that they're going to be looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening when we return. So I know that that's going to be October 4th. And then October 18th, I'm doing another taping in Marlborough, New York. And going into November, I've kind of left things up in the air just because, again, we're in this place where the second wave could potentially be hitting. And I don't necessarily want to be committing to things and then pulling out because of what's happening. So middle of October, I have those couple of things happening. Depending on how October looks going into the next 2 weeks, I might open up November a little bit more. And I am potentially scheduled to go back to Canada maybe the beginning of next year, as long as
Nice.
things are looking better.
Yeah.
So to answer that question is I have some things going on in October, and as long as the second wave doesn't look like it's coming on strong and we can get into a better looking next year, hopefully I'll make my way back to Canada and into some new promotions, and you'll be seeing some exciting things from the Renaissance.
Nice. And my last question is fairly easy. Do you have any social medias you want to plug?
Absolutely. So if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, that's my most active social media page, which is Hamlet Hurts, as in I'm going to hurt you if you get it wrong. And then like me on Facebook, Hamlet Hurtssue, Hurtssue. And we do have a Twitter. Haven't really worked it too much because I'm not a huge fan of Twitter, but we're definitely going to be more active on that in the coming months. And that is also at Hamlet Hurts. So join all the social media platforms for all your Renaissance of wrestling needs.
Oh, sorry, folks. But yeah, that was episode 9 of season 3. This may or may not be the season finale unless I'm able to get a guest I've been trying to work on for the next episode. But again, knock on wood. But this is the season finale. I hope you enjoy season 3. If not, just enjoy this episode with Hamlet Hurtssue. But yeah, thank you again for being on the show. And
Ryan, thank you so much for having me.
of course, take care, everyone. Stay safe, be well.